Hello, welcome back to the Phantom Diary channel. I'm sure there are many of you listening to my stories to fall asleep. Before we start, write in the comments what country you're listening from. If you feel fear, you should like and subscribe this channel. So, let's go. It was nearly midnight when I heard it. A faint, pitiful mewing outside my window, barely audible over the rustling of the wind. At first, I thought I had imagined it. The sound was so soft, so weak, that it almost blended with the night itself. But then I heard it again, a kitten. I hesitated for a moment, peering out into the darkness. The streetlights barely reached my porch, their dull orange glow casting long, flickering shadows across the wooden planks. The wind howled through the trees, shaking the branches like skeletal fingers. It was the kind of night where every sound felt amplified, where even the smallest noise seemed to echo in the silence. Another mew. This time, closer. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, slowly opening the front door. The cold air bit at my skin as I stepped onto the porch. My light swept across the wooden floor, searching, and then I saw it, a tiny ball of fur trembling near the steps. Its coat was filthy, clumped with dirt and dried leaves. Its ears were too large for its head, its ribs slightly visible beneath its thin body. The kitten was staring at me, wide-eyed, its pupils reflecting the light like tiny mirrors. It didn't run. Most strays bolted the second they saw a human, but this one just sat there, staring. Its eyes were so large, so unnervingly round, that, for a second, I felt something deep in my stomach twist. Something wasn't right, but then it let out another mew, a desperate, wheezing little cry, and all hesitation melted away. It was just a poor, starving animal. "Hey there, little guy," I murmured, crouching down. It didn't react, didn't flinch, just kept staring. I reached out a hand slowly, careful not to scare it. The fur was damp beneath my fingers, colder than it should have been. I gently lifted the kitten, cradling it against my chest. Its tiny heart fluttered against my palm, fast and erratic, like a trapped moth against glass. The moment I stepped inside, Ethan looked up from the couch, raising an eyebrow. "Dude, tell me that's not a stray." I shut the door behind me, shielding the kitten from the cold. It was alone out there. I couldn't just leave it. Ethan sighed, rubbing his temples. "I get it, but strays carry diseases. You should at least take it to a vet before bringing it in here." I ignored him, gently setting the kitten down on a towel near the heater. It curled up instantly, still shivering. I grabbed a small dish, filling it with water, then reached into the fridge for some leftover chicken. I placed both in front of the kitten, expecting it to eat immediately. It didn't. It just sat there, still staring. Ethan leaned forward. "Why isn't it eating?" I shrugged. "Probably scared, or sick." Ethan studied the kitten for a moment, then sighed. "Fine, but if it starts acting weird, it's on you." I stayed up for a while, watching the kitten. Its breathing was slow, steady. Its eyes, still locked on me, never blinked. At some point, exhaustion won. I left the kitten curled on the towel and headed to my room. But as I turned off the lights, I swore I heard something. A faint rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. I frowned, listening. It sounded like tiny claws against wood. Maybe the kitten moving around? I sat up, grabbing my phone to use as a light. I glanced toward my door. The kitten was sitting there, just outside my room. Its head was tilted slightly to one side, its body perfectly still. It had moved without a sound. I let out a small chuckle, trying to shake off the creeping unease. "You scared me, little guy." I scooped it up, bringing it back to the towel. This time I made sure it was settled before returning to bed. As I closed my eyes, I told myself it was just a normal kitten, just a stray in need of help. But deep down, something in me wasn't so sure. That first night, I barely slept. I kept waking up, convinced something was off. The air in my room felt heavier than usual, like the walls were pressing in just a little closer. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was overthinking things. But then the noises started. It was subtle at first, a soft rustling sound like fabric shifting. I turned over, blinking groggily. My phone's screen read 2:09 a.m., then tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. The sound was faint, coming from somewhere inside my room. I reached for my phone, using the dim glow of the screen to scan the floor. The kitten wasn't in its bed. I sat up slowly, peering toward the dark corners of the room. My pulse quickened. It had to be somewhere close. I hadn't left the door open, so it couldn't have gone far. Then, tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the window. I turned my head toward the sound, my breath catching in my throat. The kitten sat on the windowsill facing away from me. Its small, fragile body was perfectly still, ears perked. Something about the way it sat sent a chill through me. It wasn't curled up or resting. It was rigid, alert, as if waiting for something. I swallowed hard. "Kitty?" My voice came out hoarse. It didn't move, didn't flinch. I reached for my phone, switching on the flashlight. The second the beam hit the kitten, it twitched, its tiny shoulders jerking unnaturally. Then, in one slow, deliberate motion, it turned its head. Not its body, just its head. I gasped, nearly dropping my phone. The angle was wrong, too sharp. No normal cat could move like that. Its wide, glassy eyes reflected the light unblinking. A wave of nausea rolled through me. My skin crawled, my instincts screaming that something was wrong, deeply wrong. And then it moved, not in a normal, fluid motion. It jerked, like a glitching video, its limbs twitching as it stepped down from the windowsill. The tapping noise started. Again, the sound of tiny claws against wood. Tap, tap, tap. Each step was too slow, too deliberate. My fingers dug into the sheets as I fought the urge to bolt out of bed. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The kitten was just standing there, on its hind legs. I squeezed my eyes shut, my breath shallow. No, I was dreaming. I had to be dreaming. When I opened my eyes, it would be gone. But when I finally dared to look, it was still there, standing, watching. I don't know how long I sat frozen in place, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. But then, without warning, the kitten's head twitched to the side. A sound, a whisper. It wasn't coming from me. It wasn't coming from anywhere. But I heard it. Low, garbled, like someone speaking underwater. The kitten twitched again. Then, in an instant, it dropped back onto all fours and darted under my bed. I didn't move. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the empty floor where it had stood. The whispering was gone. The tapping was gone. And yet, the silence was somehow worse. I forced myself to breathe, my body drenched in cold sweat. My phone screen had gone dark, the only light now coming from the faint glow of the street lamps outside. I needed to check under the bed. I didn't want to. Every part of me screamed not to, but I had to. Slowly, I leaned over, gripping the edge of the mattress. My pulse roared in my ears as I lowered my head toward the floor. Darkness. I swallowed hard, my fingers trembling as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the black void beneath my bed. Dust, shoes, a few old books. No kitten. I scanned every inch, my breath shaky. Nothing. It was just gone. I sat up, my mind racing. The door had been closed all night. There was no way it could have left my room. But it wasn't under the bed. It wasn't on the windowsill. It wasn't anywhere. I forced myself to lie back down, staring at the ceiling. The silence stretched on, wrapping around me like a heavy fog, and then, just as I started to drift off, tap, 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 right next to my bed. My body locked up. I could feel something standing there just out of my vision. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Seconds dragged by, each one stretching into eternity. Then the weight on the mattress shifted. I felt it curl up beside me, small and warm. A soft purring filled the room. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe again. It was just the kitten. Maybe I had imagined everything. Maybe I was just exhausted. I let my eyes close, and in that moment, I felt it press against my side. Something, too long, too thin, too cold. I stopped breathing. My skin prickled with icy dread. The purring didn't stop. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. But in the back of my mind, one final thought echoed. That wasn't a kitten. I woke up, gasping. For a second, I had no idea where I was. The room was pitch black, silent except for my own ragged breathing. My heart pounded against my ribs as I sat up, struggling to shake the fog of sleep. And then I felt it. The mattress was still warm beside me. Something had been lying there. I reached for my phone, hands trembling as I turned on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the room. The kitten wasn't there. No, not a kitten. It wasn't a kitten. The memory of the night before slammed into me all at once. The tapping, the whispering, that unnatural way it moved. I forced myself to take slow breaths, trying to think logically. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just stress, sleep deprivation. But then I heard it, a slow, deliberate scratching from under the bed. I froze. It wasn't frantic like an animal, trying to escape. It was steady, purposeful, like it wanted me to know it was still there. I swallowed hard. My brain screamed at me to get up, to run, to get as far away as possible, but I had to look. I had to see. Slowly, I leaned over the side of the bed. My breath came in shallow bursts as I lowered my phone, angling the light toward the floor. At first, all I saw was dust, and then two enormous round eyes staring back at me. I jerked back so hard I nearly fell off the bed. My chest heaved, my mind racing. The eyes hadn't blinked. They had just watched, unmoving, waiting. And the worst part? They weren't at the right height. They were too high up, not where a kitten's should be. I scrambled to my feet, yanking the door open and bolting into the hallway. Ethan's room was just across from mine, and I didn't hesitate. I banged on his door, my breath sharp and uneven, a groggy mumble. Then shuffling. The door swung open, revealing Ethan rubbing his eyes. "Dude, what the hell?" I didn't speak. I just pointed toward my room. He frowned, glancing past me. "What? What happened?" My throat was dry. I could barely get the words out. "There's something under my bed." His tired expression faltered. "The cat?" I shook my head. His face darkened, but he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Fine. Let's check." I didn't want to go back in. Every nerve in my body screamed against it. But I followed him, my legs stiff and unsteady. Ethan flicked on the light. My room looked normal, like nothing had happened. He crouched down and lifted the blanket, peering under the bed. A tense silence stretched between us. Then he looked up at me. "There's nothing here." I stared at him, my mouth dry. No. I saw it. I saw it. Ethan sighed, standing up. "Dude, you're exhausted. Maybe you were dreaming." I wanted to argue, but doubt was creeping in. Had I really imagined it? The tapping, The whispering, the eyes. Was it possible I had been half asleep? Ethan clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Look, man, get some rest. I'll check in the morning, okay?" I didn't answer. He left, and I was alone again. I stood there for a long time, staring at the floor. Then I did something I'd never done before. I locked my bedroom door, and I didn't look under the bed again. The next morning, Ethan and I searched the entire house. We checked under my bed, in the closet, even outside. No sign of the kitten, no sign of anything. By midday, Ethan was back to teasing me. "Demon cat, huh?" He smirked, sipping his coffee. Maybe it was a ghost, or a sleep paralysis hallucination. I forced a laugh. Yeah, maybe. I didn't believe it, but I wanted to. Because the alternative, the idea that something had been in my room, that it was still out there, was worse. I tried to move on. For the next few nights, I kept my door locked, but nothing strange happened. No tapping, no whispering, no eyes in the dark. By the end of the week, I almost convinced myself it had been a nightmare. Almost. A few days later, Ethan and I were walking home from the store when I saw it. We were passing a narrow alley between two buildings. A dark, empty space littered with trash and dead leaves. Something was sitting there. Small, still, watching. At first, my brain refused to process it. It looked just like a normal kitten. Filthy fur, thin frame, those big, unblinking eyes. But as I stared, a horrible realization crept over me. It wasn't sitting right. Its legs were too long, its body too stiff. And then, just like that first night, it did something that made my stomach drop. It tilted its head, not a small, curious tilt. Too far, too sharp, like its neck was made of something that shouldn't bend. The air around me felt wrong, heavy. A faint ringing buzzed in my ears. My fingers tingled, ice cold. The kitten twitched, a whisper. Low, garbled, distant. My breath hitched. Ethan nudged me. "Dude, you good?" I tore my gaze away, my heart slamming against my ribs. Yeah, let's go." I didn't look back, but as we walked away, I felt it. Watching, waiting. I don't know what I let into my house that night, but it wasn't a kitten, and it still knows where to find me. It started the night after I saw it in the alley. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself everything was fine, that I was overreacting, that it was just some sick, stray cat and nothing more. Then, just as I was drifting off, the whispering began. At first, it was faint, a distant murmur, barely louder than the rustling of leaves outside. My brain, fogged with sleep, almost ignored it, until I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my room. I went, rigid. The sound was low and garbled, like someone speaking underwater. The words were impossible to make out, but I felt them. They slithered into my ears, brushing against my thoughts like cold fingers. My breath hitched. My heart pounded against my ribs. Slowly, I turned my head toward the noise. The kitten was there, sitting in the corner of my room. Its eyes gleamed in the darkness, two unblinking orbs reflecting the dim light from my phone. The whispering grew louder. I couldn't move. The sound filled my skull, wrapping around my mind like a suffocating fog. The kitten's mouth wasn't moving, but I knew it was coming from it. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. The whispering didn't stop. It only got closer. Right by my bedside. I felt something shift the air near my face. A shadow passed over me. The mattress sank, just slightly, just enough to feel the weight. I whimpered, pressing myself deeper into the bed, every muscle locked in terror. Then, something cold touched my cheek. I yelped, jerking upright, fumbling, for my phone. My fingers scrambled to switch on the flashlight. The second the beam hit the room, the whispering stopped. The kitten was gone. The air was silent, but thick with something unseen. My skin crawled with the sensation of being watched. I forced myself to move, to stand, to check every corner. The door was still locked. The windows were shut. There was nowhere for it to go, but it was gone. Still, I didn't sleep. I sat there, shaking, waiting for the whispering to start again. It didn't, but I knew it wasn't over. The next morning, I told Ethan everything. He didn't laugh this time. He stared at me, quiet, his face unusually serious. Then he sighed and rubbed his temples. Dude, this sounds like sleep paralysis or something. Or maybe stress. I mean, you've barely slept since that thing showed up. I wanted to argue, but I couldn't blame him. It sounded crazy. I sounded crazy. Still, he saw how shaken I was, so he offered to crash in my room that night, just in case. I agreed, not because I thought it would help, but because I was too afraid to be alone. That night, Ethan fell asleep almost immediately. Didn't. I lay awake, eyes locked on the ceiling, body tense. The silence in the room felt unnatural, too thick, like the air itself was watching. Then, tap, tap, tap. My stomach dropped. I turned my head slowly. The kitten was on the windowsill. Its body was completely still, but its head was turned all the way around, facing me. The whispering started. I felt it seep into my thoughts, curling around my brain like smoke. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The kitten's head twitched. The whispering grew louder. And then, next to me, Ethan stirred. Heard him groan, shifting in his sleep. He didn't wake up. But the second he moved, the whispering stopped. My head snapped back to the window. The kitten was gone. I sat there shaking, staring at the empty windowsill, heart hammering against my ribs. Ethan snored softly beside me, oblivious. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Because now I knew. It wasn't after him. It was after me, and it was getting closer. I should have left. I should have packed a bag and gone to a motel, to another town, to anywhere else. But some sick part of me needed to know how far this would go, how close it would get. Ethan was still asleep when I made my decision. I wasn't going to wake him. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't after him. It was after me. I just had to last one more night. I prepared as best I could. I locked every door, every window, turned on every light. I even pushed my dresser in front of my bedroom door, as if that would stop it. Deep down, I knew nothing would. The night dragged on. Hours passed in eerie silence. No tapping, no whispering. Just the low hum of electricity and my own racing thoughts. Maybe it was gone. Maybe I'd imagined everything. Then, at 3:12 a.m., the power went out. I was plunged into complete darkness. I sat up in bed, heart slamming against my ribs. My phone screen was the only source of light, casting a faint glow against the walls. Notification popped up. No service. The air changed. It felt thicker, heavier. Wrong. Like the atmosphere had been replaced with something denser than air. Something crawling into my lungs. Then, scratch, scratch, scratch. From inside the room, my stomach twisted. The sound was coming from the foot of my bed. Slow, deliberate, closer. Lifted my phone, the light trembling in my hands. The kitten was there, but it wasn't a kitten. Its body was stretched, its limbs too long, too thin, joints bending the wrong way. Its fur was patchy, revealing sickly pale skin underneath. Its head tilted, too far, too fast, and its mouth was moving. No sound came out, but I felt it. The whispering crawled into my skull, deep and insidious. The words weren't in any language I knew, but I understood them. Let me in. I choked on a breath, my body frozen in place. The air pulsed around me, thick with something unseen. The kitten's mouth stretched wider, too wide. Rows of tiny, needle-like teeth glistened in the glow of my phone. The whispering turned into a shrill, distorted shriek. The lights flickered back on, and the thing was gone. The air in the room lightened, like something had been sucked out of it. I was left gasping, drenched in sweat. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember anything after that moment. The next morning, the power was on. My phone had service again. Everything was normal, except for the scratches on my bedroom floor. Ethan didn't notice them. When I tried to tell him what happened, he gave me a look like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. But I knew one thing. It was over. I haven't seen the kitten since. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear the whispering, and I know it's still out there, waiting. The house next door had been abandoned for years. At least, that's what everyone said. When I first moved into my cottage on the outskirts of town, I barely noticed it. Hidden behind tall, unkempt hedges, the place was little more than a silhouette of rotting wood and shattered windows. The locals avoided talking about it. If I ever asked, they'd just shake their heads and mutter about bad history. I should have listened. The first time I noticed something wrong, it was just small things. A light flickering in one of the upstairs windows. A shadow shifting behind the curtains. I told myself it was my imagination. Then, one night, I heard knocking. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the shutters, but as I lay in bed, the knocks became rhythmic, deliberate. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. I sat up, my pulse hammering in my ears. The sound wasn't coming from my door. It was coming from inside the house next door. I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Old wood shifting in the cold night air. But the next evening, just as I was about to lock up, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The front door of the abandoned house was open, just slightly, a sliver of darkness peering out like a gaping mouth. I stared at it, heart pounding. Had it always been like that? Then, movement. A figure shifted just beyond the threshold. Not stepping forward, not retreating, just standing, watching. I slammed. My door shut and locked it. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house made my skin crawl. Every rustling tree branch sounded like footsteps. But nothing happened. Not until 3:12 a.m. A soft, distant knock. I held my breath. Tap, tap, tap. It was closer now. Tap, tap, tap. Right outside my bedroom door, the air turned thick. My chest felt tight, like something unseen was pressing down on me. I reached for my phone, fumbling for the flashlight. When I turned it on, the knocking stopped. The room was empty, but the air felt different. I barely slept after that. The next day, I made a decision. Oi was going next door. I don't know what I expected. Proof that I was imagining things. A stray animal? Some logical explanation? Instead, I found nothing. The house was completely empty. Dust-covered floors, cobwebbed corners, the scent of decay clinging to the air. There were no signs of squatters, no footprints in the dust, no reason for the door to have been open. Then I saw it, on the inside of the front door, scratched into the wood. Let me in. The marks were fresh. I ran. That night I locked every door, every window. I left every light on. At exactly 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed, a notification, unknown number, a message. I'm inside. I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I looked up. My bedroom door was open. I never heard it creak. I never felt the air shift. but I knew I wasn't alone. I grabbed my keys and ran, not stopping until I was inside my car. The cottage, the abandoned house, they could rot. I never went back. And to this day, I wonder, what would have happened if I had knocked back? It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend, a break from city life. My friends and I rented a small secluded cottage by a thick forest. It was quiet, rustic, and isolated, perfect for unwinding. We arrived late on Friday, after dark. The cottage had a cozy charm with wooden beams and a stone fireplace. The air smelled of pine, and the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. I was starting to feel like I was in another world. By the time we unpacked, we were exhausted, so we stayed in with drinks, chatting around the fire. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Across from our cottage there was another house. It was bigger, older, and looked almost abandoned. The windows were always dark, the curtains always drawn. I couldn't understand why. No one seemed to use it. I pointed it out to my friends. "Doesn't that house look strange?" Claire shrugged. "Maybe it's another vacation home. People leave their houses for months sometimes." I wasn't convinced. Something about it made my skin crawl. But I didn't say more, hoping I was just being paranoid. The next morning, we decided to hike in the woods. The weather was perfect. The sun filtered through the trees, and everything felt peaceful. But even as we walked, I kept glancing back, toward the house. I could have sworn I saw someone standing by the window, watching us. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the unease didn't go away. That night, as we sat down for dinner, the noises started. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, looking around. Everyone else was too caught up in conversation to notice. The sound came again, this time louder. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't outside, it was coming from the wall. I excused myself and walked to the bathroom. As I passed the window, I saw a figure standing by the edge of the woods, near the other cottage. My heart raced. It was a tall, thin man, standing completely still. When I looked again, he turned and walked into the trees. My breath caught in my throat. I rushed to the bathroom and locked the door, trying to calm myself. Was I imagining things, or was there someone out there? When I returned, I kept quiet, not wanting to alarm anyone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I heard creaks in the house and faint taps on the walls. And every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was watching me. The next day, we decided to walk near the edge of the woods. As we passed the house next door, I noticed something strange. The front door was ajar, just a crack. "That's weird," I said. "I'm sure it was shut last night." Claire didn't seem concerned. "Maybe it just blew open," she said, brushing it off, but I couldn't help but feel like it was intentional. As we walked past, I glanced toward the house. There, behind the cracked door, was the same figure from the night before. He was watching us. I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't seen him, but my pulse quickened. I couldn't understand why he was there. That evening, the house next door remained still, silent. But I felt uneasy, like something wasn't right. The noises started again. A low, whispering sound coming from the direction of the other house. Soft, almost too faint to hear, but it was there. I turned off the lights, hoping to block it out, but the whispering seemed to grow louder, almost like it was speaking directly to me. The next morning, as we packed up to leave, I glanced back at the cottage next door. The front door was wide open now, and the house looked even more abandoned than before. I didn't see anyone around, but I felt the weight of someone's gaze, like they were watching us from inside. We drove away without saying much. My friends didn't seem to notice anything unusual, but I knew that house, that figure, it was still there, and next time, I wouldn't be so sure it would stay hidden. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend away, a break from work and the city. My friends and I rented a secluded cottage nestled at the edge of a thick forest. It was perfect, quiet, rustic, and miles from the nearest town. Just what we needed. Arrived late Friday night, well after dark. The cottage had an old cozy charm with wooden beams and a stone fireplace. The smell of pine trees mixed with the crisp, cool air. I felt like I was in another world. By the time we unpacked and got the fire going, it was already too late to explore. We settled in with drinks, chatting and laughing around the fire. It felt like we were the only people on Earth. But something felt off. As the night wore on, I noticed the house next door, a larger, worn-down cottage, slightly hidden behind trees. At first, I thought it was just another weekend getaway, but something was odd about it. The curtains were always drawn, and there was no sign of life. It looked abandoned. I pointed it out to my friends. "Doesn't that house look strange?" Claire laughed. "It's probably just another vacation home. People leave their houses for months up here." "But it looks empty," I said. "Maybe. The owners don't visit often," Claire replied with a shrug. The next morning, after a good night's sleep, we decided to hike through the woods. The weather was perfect. Cool, sunny, with a gentle breeze. But even as we ventured deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I glanced back toward the cottage. In the distance, through the trees, I saw movement. Someone was there, standing by the window, watching us. I quickly turned away. It was probably just my imagination, but the unease didn't fade. That night, we were having dinner when I heard it. A tapping sound. Soft, faint, almost like someone knocking on the wall. I looked around, but no one else seemed to hear it. It came again. Tap, tap, tap. Excusing myself, I went to the bathroom, but as I stood up, I saw something through the window. A figure was standing near the edge of the woods, right by the house next door. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, tall and thin, standing still. Watching us, I froze, unable to move. Then, just as I focused on him, he turned, slowly, and vanished into the trees. I rushed to the bathroom, my pulse racing. What was that? I convinced myself I had just imagined it. But when I returned to the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that night, the weird noises started again. Creaks, soft taps on the walls. I convinced myself it was the house settling. Still, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something lurking in the shadows, waiting. The next morning, we decided to explore the area, hoping to clear our heads. As we walked along, a path near the edge of the forest, I glanced back at the house next door. The front door was ajar, gently swaying in the wind. "That's weird," I muttered. "I swear it was closed last night. Maybe the owners are just out," Claire suggested. I hesitated before walking past the house, but my curiosity got the better of me. I glanced over my shoulder. Standing just behind the door was the same man I had seen the night before. I quickly turned back around, trying to ignore the cold fear creeping down my spine. But I couldn't forget the way he had just stood there, motionless, staring at me. The rest of the day passed in eerie silence. We didn't talk about the man. We didn't need to. Something was off, but none of us could place it. That night I woke to a strange sound. A whisper. It was faint, almost unintelligible, but it came from the direction of the cottage next door. I strained to hear, but the words were lost in the wind. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, but the whispering stopped immediately. I lay there, frozen, too scared to move, waiting for something to happen. But nothing did. The next morning, we packed up to leave. I couldn't stand being there any longer. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The cottage next door was still there, silent, abandoned, as if no one had ever been there. But in the upstairs window, I could have sworn I saw a shadow move. I didn't say anything. No one else had noticed. But I knew one thing for sure. The strange house. It was still out there, and it would be waiting for me the next time I came back. Spending the weekend alone at my uncle's cottage seemed like the perfect getaway. No traffic, no noisy neighbors, just peace and quiet deep in the woods. I had books, snacks, and all the time in the world to relax. The first night was uneventful. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the occasional rustling of leaves and distant hoots of owls. I fell asleep easily, wrapped in the comfort of isolation. Then, in the middle of the night, something woke me up. A sound, a faint, slow scraping against the window. I lay still, heart pounding, listening. It was soft, almost hesitant, like something was testing the glass. My bed was across the room, far enough that I couldn't see the window clearly in the dark, but I felt something there. I told myself it was a tree branch. Maybe the wind had picked up, then it stopped. The silence was worse. I strained my ears, waiting. My pulse thumped in my throat. A few minutes passed. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath and turned over, pulling the blanket tighter. Just as I started to drift off, a long, slow breath right outside the window. My stomach clenched. It was deep, too deep to be an animal, and too controlled. Someone was standing there, watching. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I had this overwhelming primal instinct. Don't look. Something inside me knew that if I turned toward the window, if I acknowledged it would get worse. I stayed still, eyes shut tight, willing myself to ignore it. Minutes passed. Maybe an hour. Then, finally, the feeling faded. I must have passed out from exhaustion, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the curtains. I bolted upright, gasping for air. It was over. Right? I forced myself to get up, pushing away the memories of the night. I made coffee, stepped outside to get some fresh air, and told myself it had been a dream. But as I sipped my coffee, my gaze drifted to the ground beneath my window. The dirt was disturbed. Not footprints exactly, but the earth looked like it had been dragged, like something had crawled away. I packed my bags and left before the sun went down. I didn't look back, and I never stayed in that cottage again. I decided to spend a weekend alone at my uncle's remote cottage in the woods. He'd been offering it to me for years, and after a stressful few months at work, I figured it would be the perfect escape. The isolation, the quiet, it all sounded ideal for some much-needed rest. I arrived late in the afternoon, unpacked my things, and settled into the cottage. It was a cozy little place, rustic, with wooden beams and a stone fireplace. The weather was cool, the air crisp with a slight chill, and the forest around the cottage was silent, except for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The first evening passed without incident. I spent some time reading by the fire, had a simple dinner, and eventually turned in for bed. My room was upstairs with a large window that looked out over the forest. The moonlight filtered in through the trees, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Around 2 a.m., I woke up. Something was off. I wasn't sure what had disturbed me, maybe a sound or a shift in the atmosphere, but I lay there in the dark, my heart pounding. I glanced toward the window. The trees outside were still, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I told myself I was being silly. There was no one out there, just the wilderness. But the feeling wouldn't go away. I heard a faint creak. I froze. It wasn't from inside the house. It was outside, a subtle shift in the wind, maybe, or the house settling. But then the sound came again, closer this time. The floorboards creaked just beneath the window, as though someone was standing right outside, their weight pressing into the earth. I felt an ice-cold shiver run down my spine. The moonlight outside cast long, twisted shadows across the ground, and I couldn't make out anything. But the feeling of being watched, was stronger now. The silence returned, and I almost convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I turned over, trying to get back to sleep. Then, a breath. It was so faint at first, like a whisper, but there was no one else in the house. My breath hitched, my skin crawled. I pulled the covers over my head, trying to block it out. But the sense that something was wrong grew. There was someone out there. Someone standing just outside my window, their breath cold and slow. I didn't want to look. I didn't dare look. But my curiosity overpowered my fear. I forced myself to open my eyes, just a crack, and glance toward the window. And there it was, a shape standing in the moonlight. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its features indiscernible. The closer I looked, the more distorted it seemed. It was too tall, too thin. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, like they didn't quite belong. The outline of its face was blurry, a faint impression of something, but nothing recognizable. My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't look away, but my body screamed at me to run, to hide, to do anything but look. And just as I was about to tear my gaze away, it moved. The figure shifted slightly, its long, thin arm reaching up toward the window. But it didn't knock or tap. Its fingers dragged across the glass, slowly, deliberately. Not a sound at first, but the sensation was unbearable. It felt like the glass was vibrating under its touch, like it was scraping at my very soul. I gasped, my hands trembling. I knew I had to move, to do something, but I couldn't. I was frozen in place, unable to tear my eyes away. The thing's face slowly tilted toward me, and even though I couldn't see its eyes, I could feel its intense gaze. It knew I was there. It was waiting for me to make a move. Then, suddenly, it vanished. Not a step, not a sound, but the figure was just gone, like it had never been there at all. I rushed out of bed, heart racing, stumbling down the stairs and locking the door behind me. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe the creature would vanish, or maybe I could outrun it, but I felt safer in the living room. I sat there, wide-eyed, waiting for something to happen. The rest of the night was eerily quiet. The minutes ticked by with no more sounds, no more movement. As dawn approached, I finally fell asleep on the couch, exhausted and terrified. The next morning, I went outside, but the woods were still. The house next door was dark, just like before. Nothing seemed out of place. I checked the window, the area around the cottage, but there were no signs of anything unusual. I left that afternoon. I couldn't bring myself to stay another night. To this day, I never went back, but every time I pass that area, I can't shake the feeling that something is still out there, waiting, always waiting, just beyond the edge of the trees. And I know one thing for certain. I never looked at that window again. I needed a break. So when my uncle offered his secluded cottage for the weekend, I jumped at the chance. It was hidden deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest neighbor. Perfect for clearing my head, I thought. The first day went smoothly. I read by the fire, listened to the rustling of the trees, and enjoyed the peace. It was the kind of quiet you only find in places like this, far from the noise of the city. By evening, I felt completely relaxed. I made a simple dinner and settled in to sleep. The bed was comfortable. The room dim but cozy with the moonlight spilling through the window. It was the perfect night. But then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard something. At first, I thought it was a breeze or an animal moving around outside, but the sound was different. A soft scraping, like fingernails brushing against glass. I froze, my heart jumping in my chest. My room had one small window, and I could just barely make out the trees outside in the darkness. The wind was light. It shouldn't have been making that noise. I held my breath, trying to listen more closely. There it was again, the scraping. A long, deliberate sound, like something or someone was trying to get my attention. I sat up, my pulse quickening. I wanted to look out the window, but something told me not to. A deep instinct I couldn't ignore. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it was nothing. The scraping stopped, and for a moment there was only silence. I told myself it was nothing, probably a branch brushing against the window. I pulled the blanket over me and tried to calm down, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I turned over, facing the wall, hoping sleep would come. Then came another sound. This one was even more unsettling. A low, dragging noise. It seemed to be moving around the window like something circling it, searching. I held my breath, staring at the wall. The noise stopped and everything fell completely still. I should have gotten up to check. I should have, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed there, frozen. I wanted to call my uncle or leave, but I didn't want to seem like I was overreacting. And no part of me wanted to open that window and look outside. When the sun finally rose, felt a little more at ease. The daylight brought normality back, but I was still on edge. I forced myself to get up, stretch, and start the day. I went out for a walk in the woods, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, but the entire time I couldn't stop thinking about the noises. It was as if the woods were holding something back, something I wasn't supposed to know. That night, I promised myself I'd sleep without worry. I double-checked the locks on the doors and windows, convinced that whatever happened the previous night was just my imagination. But as the hours passed and I settled into bed, I heard it again. Scraping. At first, it was faint, like before, just the sound of something brushing against the glass. But it grew louder, more insistent. I was wide awake now, my heart pounding in my ears. I told myself it was just an animal, but I knew that wasn't true. I could feel it. Someone or something was out there. I forced myself to look toward the window. There, at the edge of the glass, was a shadow. A figure. Not human, not an animal. I couldn't see its face, but the outline was unmistakable. A shape moving, pressing against the glass. I felt like I was suffocating. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. I just stared, frozen, as the figure seemed to look back at me. Then, with a sudden jolt, it disappeared. The scraping stopped. The shadow was gone. I scrambled, out of bed, fumbling to turn on the lights. The room was empty. The window was still locked. Nothing was outside. I stayed awake the rest of the night, unable to shake the image of that thing on the other side of the glass. The next morning, I left. I didn't pack. I didn't even look at the cottage as I drove away. I just left. I never went back. I heard later from my uncle that the cottage had been in the family for generations. No one had ever stayed for more than a weekend. I didn't ask why. I didn't need to know. I had rented my uncle's old cottage in the woods for the weekend, hoping to escape the noise of the city. The idea was to disconnect and spend time reading, enjoying nature and getting some much-needed rest. The first night was peaceful. The air smelled of pine, and the soft rustling of the trees outside helped me sleep. My room had a single window that overlooked the forest, and I kept the curtains open, enjoying the view of the distant trees. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a soft sound, a gentle scraping, like something rubbing against the glass. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the wind or maybe a branch swaying in the breeze. But then it happened again. This time, I sat up in bed, my heart thudding in my chest. The sound was coming from the window, steady, like nails brushing against glass. I told myself it was nothing. Probably an animal or a trick of the wind. The cottage was old after all, but still, something gnawed at me. I wasn't sure why, but I felt compelled to look, to see what was making that noise. I slowly turned my head toward the window. In the pitch-black darkness, all I could make out was my own reflection, the faint outline of the room behind me, but nothing outside. No figure, no shape, just the trees swaying gently. Relieved, I breathed a little easier. Then, just as I was about to lie back down, I saw something. A shadow. It was quick, fleeting, but I was sure I saw it. Something moving, in the corner of the window. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe a trick of the light, or a bug flying by. I lay back down, but the unease stayed with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The house creaked, the wind howled outside, but the scratching sound continued, though quieter this time. It seemed to be coming from the same spot, right near the window. I had to check. I couldn't take it anymore. I crept out of bed, my bare feet cold against the wooden floor. I approached the window slowly, the soft rustle of the trees outside the only sound. Nothing. The window was empty. No figure, no movement, just the black void of the night and the trees, stretching far into the distance. I sighed in relief. But when I turned to head back to bed, I caught a glimpse of something else in the reflection of the glass. A shape, just behind me. I spun around, my heart in my throat. But the room was empty. Nothing. The floor, the walls, silent. I turned back to the window and froze. The shadow I had seen in the reflection was now right outside the window. I could see a face I did not recognize, pressed up against the glass, its eyes wide and unblinking. I didn't know how long it had been there, but it felt like forever. Panic hit me like a freight train. I rushed to the door and pulled it open, heart pounding, ready to flee into the night. But the moment I stepped out into the dark hallway, I heard the same sound, the scratching. I stumbled back, unsure of what to do. Was someone messing with me? Or was it something else? The noise moved, coming from the other side of the cottage, now. I followed the sound cautiously, my legs trembling with each step. It led me around the house, toward the back door. I reached the door and froze. A dark shape stood near the window at the back of the house. It was a person. No, it was more than that. The figure was too still, too unnatural. The body was slightly hunched, its arms hanging loosely by its sides. It had a face, pale, almost sickly white, staring straight at me, unmoving. I backed away slowly, not daring to take my eyes off the figure. It didn't move, but its presence felt suffocating, like it was pulling at the very air around me. Suddenly, I heard a voice, whispering. It was so faint, but it was there, just on the edge of my hearing. Words I couldn't make out, but they were unmistakable. The voice wasn't human. It was then I realized. The figure wasn't real. It wasn't flesh and bone. It was something else. Something that shouldn't have been there. I didn't think. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my car, the engine roaring to life as I sped down the dirt road. I didn't even look back. The next day, I returned to the cottage with my uncle, wanting to explain what happened, but when I got there, the house was empty. The windows were all shut tight. No sign of anyone. I don't know if what I saw was real or if my mind had conjured it in a moment of fear. But I do know this. I never went back, and I never will. I had been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. A peaceful escape in my uncle's old cottage, deep in the woods. No distractions, no work, just me and nature. The first day was everything I had hoped for. The smell of pine trees, the quiet, rustle of leaves, the birds singing overhead. I unpacked my things, made myself comfortable, and even had time for a short hike around the area before it got dark. That night, I made myself a simple dinner, lit the fireplace, and settled down, with a book. The wind outside was calm, the sky clear. It seemed like the perfect evening, but as I sat in the living room, reading, I began to feel uneasy. It was subtle at first, a strange feeling of being watched, a weight on the back of my neck. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but nothing was there. I laughed it off, telling myself I was just adjusting to the isolation. But then, around midnight, I heard something from the direction of the window. A soft, scraping sound. I froze. It wasn't loud, but it was there. I stood up cautiously and walked over to the window, trying to make out what was causing the noise. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. There was nothing in sight. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was just the wind or some small animal. Still, the feeling of unease lingered, and the noise didn't stop. I returned to the couch, trying to distract myself with the book, but the scratching continued. Not constant, but sporadic, almost like something was moving just outside, testing the window. I closed my book and stood still, listening. Closely, the noise was almost too quiet to make out, but it was there, dragging across the window frame. Slow, deliberate. I glanced at the window again. My reflection stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming urge to look outside. It was as if something was pulling me toward the window, forcing me to see. I hesitated, my breath quickening. I knew better than to give in. But it was too late. My legs moved on their own, carrying me closer to the glass. I reached for the curtain. Just as my fingers touched the fabric, the sound stopped. The air in the room felt thick. Everything was still. I pulled the curtain back, heart pounding. The yard outside was empty. The trees were silent. Nothing moved. I exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and confusion. Maybe it had been an animal after all, or maybe my mind had started playing tricks on me in the silence of the night. I turned to walk back to the couch when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, the reflection in the window. It wasn't mine. A pale face stared back at me, wide-eyed and unmoving, as if it had been standing behind me this whole time. The reflection's mouth opened slowly, and I saw it. A smile. I spun around, heart hammering, but there was nothing behind me. Just the empty room. I looked back at the window. The reflection was gone. My breath came in short gasps as I backed, away from the window, my body shaking. I rushed to the door, throwing it open to check the yard. But there was nothing, only the forest, calm and dark, stretching into the distance. The wind picked up, rustling the branches, and I slammed the door shut. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, terrified to even think about going near that window again. The strange feeling of being watched never left me, and I didn't sleep a wink. The next morning, I left early. I didn't even pack my things. I just drove. I didn't look back at the cottage as I sped away. As I passed the turn to the cottage, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house seemed so normal, quiet, untouched by anything unusual. But in the distance, through the trees, I swore I saw a figure standing near the window, watching. I drove faster, not daring to stop.